Welcome to part 2 of doing discussions well. In this video, we want to touch on the approach of what happened that made things difficult and how to assess what lies beneath. So, what happened? Many challenging conversations involve a discussion about something that has taken place in the past. Most people involved in these conversations believe they know what happened. In other words, each person believes that his or her view is the clear recollection of what had transpired, and now they need to explain to the other person how or why the other person's behavior was not appropriate. As many of us have experienced, focusing on the past can be fruitless, or worse, it can create more problems than it solves. Which helps us understand a bit more why Jesus again and again called us to forgiveness. One of the greatest hallmarks of faith is forgiving others. Focusing on the past can be fruitless or destructive for a variety of reasons, including what happened in the past can't be changed. People can invest a lot of energy trying to prove they were right and the other person was wrong, and this can provoke defensive behavior, which further escalates and polarizes the discussion. Even if a person convinces the other person that their behavior was wrong, it usually does not yield the results they want. Most people want the other person to admit wrongdoing, in part to confirm that the bad behavior will not be repeated. There's some benefits to discussing what happened, but it depends on the reason why one is looking into the past. Therefore, the question is not whether we should discuss what happened in the past, but how and for what purpose. The goals of discussing the past could be one of these things below, so that it doesn't happen again. We can talk about expectations, we can talk about boundaries, etc., to clear the air and not carry or build resentment. It can be the restoration of a relationship. Often people ask, when do you talk about something? When do you actually leave it and when do you bring it up? Particularly when we're talking about stuff that happened between people. Well, you talk about it if you can't let it go. If you're holding a grudge or if it lingers. If you can't let it go, it will weaken trust in the relationship and damage it. There are many traps we can fall into when discussing the past, which lead us away from our goal of having a productive discussion and improving the situation in the future. So let's talk about 3 traps that we can all fall into along the way. The first trap is looking to lay blame. If the goal is to improve the situation for the future, finding fault and laying blame can work directly against that goal. When people fear that they may be found to be at fault and be blamed, they become defensive. As people become defensive, they become accusatory, and they may hold back information or provide the information in a way that promotes finding someone else responsible. When information is withheld or distorted, it can become even more difficult to figure out what really happened. So one of the most powerful ways to demonstrate that the conversation about what happened is not about blame is to acknowledge early in the conversation your own contribution to the present situation. Acknowledging your own contribution gives a strong message that you're looking to develop understanding and not simply to lay blame. Also, recognizing how you may have contributed to the situation gives you some valuable information about how you can contribute to the solution. It may not be possible to make the other person change his or her behavior, but we can always change our own. It's important that we actually map out the contribution system. Let me give you an example of this. So a woman leaves her camera on the post at the bottom of the stairs as she heads out the door of her home. She calls her husband to ask him to grab the camera and bring it with him because he's joining her later. Before he gets to it, as he's doing some other things, their teenage son comes bounding down the stairs and the vibration of his steps knocks the camera off the post and cracks the lens. The husband sheepishly brings the broken camera to his wife and she is angry and blames him. So we have a broken camera, but we have not fully mapped out the elements that contributed to that outcome. Is it just his fault? Trap 2, arguing from conclusions. We are often unconscious of the process we use to arrive at certain conclusions. We are conscious of having decided that the store clerk is rude or that our boss is controlling. Before we can reach a conclusion of any kind, we must have some information. Fortunately or not, there's a world of information presenting itself to us at all times. For example, upon entering our office, we can notice any or all of the following: what some people are wearing, the color of the walls or the carpet, the noise of the construction site outside, whether the phone is ringing, what is being said, how you're feeling, and so on. And we ignore a lot of this information. Some of it, however, we pay attention to. The information we do not notice, or we do notice, the information we do notice is then interpreted by us, which leads us to a certain conclusion. In difficult conversations, we frequently talk about our conclusions. For example, you were in a bad mood today, and not the information received, which is, you did not smile at me or say hello when I walked by you. We interpreted the information to mean they are in a bad mood. We interpret information differently because we have different life experiences. We are from different cultures sometimes, different generations, all kinds of differences. All of this can result in us arriving at a very different conclusion about a shared experience. So let me give you another example. There's a woman. She has 14 children from 10 different fathers. What's your first impression about this woman? I'll give you a moment. Comes to mind. Well, I'm speculating that most of you muttered something under your breath like she's promiscuous or loose or needing to find love. Am I right? Most likely. The truth is, this woman's name is Mia Farrow, and she has 4 biological children from 2 fathers. And the other 10 she adopted, and they all have different fathers. Did that information change your conclusion about the information you had? I would think so. What I just described is called the ladder of inference. We take the limited facts we have on a situation, we climb up the ladder, we draw our conclusions, and then we argue our position from that place. The mistake isn't making a conclusion, but rather arguing from it. Trap 3, failure to separate intention from impact. We often judge other people in part by our assumptions about their intentions. We judge others by their behavior, their actions, but we judge ourselves often by our intentions. We look at what we meant to do and we try to plead our motives with others, but we assess others by their actions and their behaviors, not their intentions. If we receive feedback from a team member in a leadership meeting about how we might improve a particular way we are doing church, we will react very differently if we think that person was trying to make us look bad in the group than if we thought they were actually genuinely trying to help improve the church. In either case, we may feel embarrassed or foolish or angry, but exactly how we feel and how strongly we feel will be influenced by our beliefs about that person's intentions. So what do we do then? Well, here's a great help. Name the impact. That is, how it affected you, but inquire about the intention. Dig to find out, as you may be wrong on the intention. Sometimes we work back from the impact on us to determine what the other person's intentions were. So if we're embarrassed by a comment made by a team member in a leadership meeting, we attribute negative intentions to that person. The impact on us was negative, so the intention is assumed to be negative. Similarly, we work forward from our intentions to determine our impact on others. If we meant our comments to be constructive, we assume that they will be received that way, and we feel unjustly accused when someone tells us that our comments landed negatively for them. We want to plead with them that our heart was in the right place. In both cases, we're assuming that there's an obvious connection between intention and impact. This may not be the case. Another mistake we can make is to have an assumption about what the other person's intentions are based on how we would have behaved in that situation. For example, a friend fails to visit you in the hospital after a major surgery. You would always visit in the hospital people you cared about. So you assume that if this friend really was your friend and really cared for you, they would have visited you because that's how you would have done it. So in this way, you made an assumption about their intentions based on how you would have behaved in those circumstances. So while we can always be clear about how the behavior of others has impacted us, and we need to do that, we cannot be clear about their intentions. We need to inquire. Therefore, it can be helpful when discussing what happened at a leadership meeting to recognize that the impact on you was real, and you're entitled to discuss that impact, and that impact may have been completely divorced from their intentions. Similarly, our good intentions can have a bad impact on someone else. Just because we had a good intention does not mean that we should ignore the impact of our actions. This is where the gap over racism in our culture today largely falls, in my opinion. We're not able to separate the impact of our intentions. Someone may not be intending to make a racist comment or have racist views, but it does not mean that our intention equals the impact. Lastly, let's talk about what lies beneath. Sometimes in conversations, we find things are not progressing as we would like or had hoped. We're confronted with the symptoms or the problem of a difficult conversation, and we often simply just act on it. For example, the other person is being very positional in their posture in this conversation with us, so we decide to take a strong position as well, a tit-for-tat approach, if you would. The other person is making personal attacks, so we attack back. The other person's avoiding the hard stuff, so we avoid. In each case, we are taking action to respond to what shows us as a symptom without actually analyzing why the problem might be arising in the first place. So let me offer you a framework to think about it differently. There's 4 phases to understanding what lies beneath: symptoms or the problem, diagnosis or the why, prescriptions or the options, and then the actions or the action plan. You can see that diagram on the screen. It helps explain that. In the diagram, we have the diagnosis and prescription, which are the theoretical world part of the process, meaning we're trying to grasp what they could be. We also have the real world challenges, which are the symptoms or the problem, and what actions are we going to take here. We also have the diagnosis and symptom, which is what is wrong, and the prescription and action, which is what might be done. Can you see all that on the diagram? I hope so. The symptom or the problem, as seen in the bottom left of the diagram, is what most of us experience, and we simply move to taking action. We skip the diagnosis and the prescription steps. In the chart, the diagnosis phase invites us to take a moment to analyze the problem. In this phase, we might ask ourselves why we think the other person might be adopting a positional approach with us. Why are they being aggressive or weepy or unresponsive? Once we have identified the reasons, we might think why the other person is adopting the approach they have, then we can move to the third phase. In that prescription phase, we attempt to identify all the different courses of action we might take. We take a moment to diagnose the situation and explore a variety of potential approaches, which will increase the likelihood of an ultimate approach of being more effective. And for reasons it can be more effective, it decreases the chance of us taking actions without thinking, which is never good. It decreases our chances that our responses will be based on erroneous assumptions about why the other person is adopting the approach they are. For example, your instincts may tell you that the other person is being positional, stubborn, and inflexible in an attempt to intimidate you. In the diagnosis phase, however, you might identify other reasons why someone is adopting a positional stance that is not about those reasons. It could be a lack of preparedness and therefore reluctant to consider a variety of options on their part. It could be a fear of failure or a lack of self-awareness, or maybe they're just a poor listener under stress or caught in the present mindset. In the prescription phase, you look to identify a list of possible courses of action that include offering alternatives, asking questions, not mirroring, being open to that possibility that they are right, naming the game, being positional yourself, asking for objective criteria upon which they are basing their position. Let me leave you with some real gold here. The most persuasive thing you can do is being open to being persuaded. Now, if you do that as a manipulative move and are truly not open, it's actually worse than not doing it. But if you're truly open to being wrong or nuanced in a new way, it can be extremely impactful in opening the other person. In the action phase, we then try and pick the list of possible approaches. We ask questions of the other person to assist us in diagnosing the problem. First, select approaches that are not tied to an assumption as to why the other person is behaving the way you find them behaving. If the problem persists, you may try higher risk approaches from your list of possible courses of action. Things like calling them out on it, indicating there's broken trust, speaking it fully and freely. So let me wrap this all up by saying difficult conversations are challenging. By using these soft skills and processes, you can make a difficult conversation easier, more productive, and less damaging. The skills I'm offering you are skills that will make you a more effective peacemaker in your relationships. As followers of Jesus, learning how to participate in the reconciliation of relationships, which is at the heart of the gospel, is important to us. Paul, speaking in 2 Corinthians 5:18 and 19, says this, "All this comes from God, who settled the relationship between us and him, and then called us to settle our relationships with each other. God put the world square within himself through his Messiah's giving the world a fresh start by offering the forgiveness of sins. God has given us the task of telling everyone what he's doing. We're Christ's representatives. God uses us to persuade men and women to drop their differences and enter into God's work of making things right between them." So to succinctly capture the 4 themes of making difficult conversations easier, of becoming a better peacemaker, let me say this. Be aware of the identity triggers when a conversation may be challenging your sense of self or theirs. Be aware of your emotional footprint. Emotions are giving you feedback or important information. We do not have to act on our emotions, but we do not want to ignore them in our process. Don't look to blame, argue from conclusions, or fail to separate impact from intention when discussing the narrative on what happened. Check to see if your assumptions and expectations are in line with the behavior you're observing before taking action as you look to see what lies beneath. When we come together, we'll now take time to process all of this, and we'll do it in smaller groups, or we'll give you more real-life situations. I look forward to this. See you soon.